Welcome into our third session of the course on EUREKA. At the beginning, I will try to review very fast, but in a way so that those of you who missed last class, who were not here, can get connection between the first and the third one. Yeah. There is a unique condition for a possible occurrence of EUREKA, which is recognized in all cultures and civilizations. It was expressed through a phenomenon of going into desert or into solitude, trying to find place where one cannot be disturbed. You know, all cultures and civilizations had it, that they had people who felt serious problem to solve. They didn't want to be distracted. So they went into a place where you cannot be distracted. Desert is an ideal place. Other elements involved are, let's say, in 20th century, one of the greatest physicists, Werner Heisenberg, was bothered by serious problems in quantum physics. It was a problem of particle and motion within the structure of atom, particle and position. In our classical knowledge, it was assumed that you have to know both of them, where the particle is and the speed of the particle. To have a complete knowledge requires knowledge of both of them. Within the breakthroughs of 20th century quantum physics, it became clear that it cannot be done. But how to express it when 300 years of tradition established belief that in order to know, you have to know both the position of the particle and the speed of the particle. So if I am the particle, I have a speed 20 miles an hour. And you know how far I can be on the highway to Big Delta. You know, in an hour you can figure out exactly and you will know. But if particles are moving with these tremendous speeds, it became clear that it is probably more difficult to know both position and the speed of the particle. Werner Heisenberg Nobel Prize winner in physics, decided to leave Copenhagen, where he was stationed at that time, and decided to go to Helgoland. Those of you who are familiar with northern Germany know what Helgoland is. A desolate state where sea waves are beating the rocks, huge rocks. So if you come there, you know, there is monotonous beating of waves. And here is where Heisenberg went. And in the middle of this noise, he had temerity to accept a eureka, that it is impossible to know both speed and the position. This is his principle of uncertainty. We can never know both. It was very daring to make this clear-cut statement. It goes against the whole tradition of the West. And so this was Eureka in exactly the same conditions, you know, as those saints and visionaries, mystics had in desert. You know, the source is the same. I emphasize the condition, not the content. You know, the source is the same, the conditions. There is another element, you know, something what Romans expressed in a beautiful slogan. Omnia mea mecum porto. I carry everything with myself. Omnia mea mecum porto. So everything what... Yes, please. Yeah. I will be chained once more. Should I write it? Do you want to have it in Latin? Omnia mea mecum porto. You will forget it probably. In English it is, I carry everything what I have with myself wherever I go. I cannot get rid of myself. So now you can imagine what happens when somebody goes to Helgoland. He carries himself everything what he has. Wherever you go, if you try to escape, you cannot escape yourself. And here, under the pressure of conditions of your mind, you have to bracket yourself. So this, I carry everything with myself. So if you are under pressure, you feel that you have, you get into solitude.
Maybe your speaker is too close to your real.
So before any new idea can occur under this new pressure in isolation, in solitude, you have to, and by very nature of the problem, you forget everything else. This is what Husserl called bracketing. You eliminate everything from your mind, just you focus on the very problem you have. So these are the last conditions you have to fulfill in order to expect something to come. And as we know, it does not have to come. You can be frustrated, you go home, and you start all over again. Until maybe one day it happens. So Buddha did the same day. He went into forests, Heisenberg to Helgoland, and Arabian desert had many of the visionaries who were discovering new great truth. I would like to emphasize that there is a little difference between Heisenberg and probably all other discoveries. Heisenberg and not so much Newton. You remember what Newton believed. When he was hit by the apple, he said, hypothesis non fingo. I do not pretend to give you a hypothesis. This is not a hypothesis. it is coming from outside, in a way like Moses, coming from outside. You see, for Heisenberg, it came, he knew, from within his mind. And then he gave it to others to be tested. He did not run with it as the truth. He gave it to others to try to experiment with it and prove if it is indeed the case. So this is the basic difference. 99% of those who had eurekas believed that it was coming from outside. They could not accept that they could have been authors of all of these ideas, that it could have happened in their own mind. Now I will mention one of the great historical cases, that of Moses. I don't want to get involved in any theological discussion with anybody. I don't want to offend anybody's belief. That's your privacy to believe what really happened at Mount Sinai. And I will use the concept of Eureka and attempt to interpret Moses as having a great Eureka. Again, no theological implication. I am not a theologian. I would not dare to fight anybody on this very thin theological ice. And so, you know the story from the film Ten Commandments. Many of you have read it in Exodus. It is a story of Jewish people who worked for many years, 100 years, as slaves for Egyptians in Egypt. It is a great story of a young boy born out of a relationship between the queen or princess and a slave, Jewish slave. This was young Moses, who was then educated according to principles of Egyptian society, acquired Egyptian language, customs, and everything else. But something in him later on had awakened. And probably Jewish DNA, or feeling that he belongs, to the people who are working so hard. Later, he became closely affiliated with them and decided to liberate them. He succeeded, being followed by Egyptians who didn't want to lose these slaves. They moved in direction to Mount Sinai, and then miracles happened. Waters opened. Escapees were able to escape. Waters closed. Those who followed them were on one side of the waters, the others, liberated ones, on the other side. Here is probably something what is also universal. When you are a slave, you respect, or you are forced to respect, a whip. You do everything what the slave driver is asking you to do in order to survive. What happens when the whip disappears? You feel you have acquired freedom. Now, what to do with the freedom? And this is what must have happened to these Jewish escapees. They didn't know what to do. If the whip is gone, maybe there are some kind of stories according to which our people lived before. And this is exactly what happened. As long as this group was escaping, they were well organized in their escape. As soon as they acquired freedom, the social cohesiveness stopped working. They were free, they didn't know what to do with the freedom. They started returning to their own stories, habits, many of them from paganism. They started celebrating a golden calf. And now, you can imagine you are a leader, you are Moses. Let's have some empathy with the leader. He leads the people out of captivity, and as soon as they reach it, he sees what is happening. You can ask yourself, what would you do if you are a leader and you see what your people are doing around you? People are demoralized. It is unable to control them. I think you could very well think, my God, I should have left them there. What a fool I was. This kind of people, what can I do with them? You could despair very well. And permit me to assume that he did. Moses did despair. Humanly, it is understandable. He didn't know what to do. You cannot reason with these people. You know, they are, each one is for himself and doesn't care for anything. He left them in despair, trying to figure out what to do. In the meantime, the escapees were happy doing their own thing. Moses must have been in solitude, not in desert, not with the big mountains, but everything was desolate around him, and he had only one problem: how to introduce order among these people. What to do? And under the pressure, which lasted probably quite a long time, weeks, he had EUREKA. Now with this EUREKA, there is a question: how did he understand this EUREKA? Let me conjecture what probably many of you would do, at least what I would do. If I am in the shoes of Moses, And if I have Eureka like this, that there must be some rules, some laws, which I will give to my people, according to which a social group can survive. And this Eureka gave him these hints. I would dare to add another Eureka, because he must have been a very smart man who realized that when he goes down to his people from Mount Sinai, and if he comes and says, guys, look what I have figured out. Number one. Number two. I guess they would have been sitting there still now, and they would have amended him to death, you know, about number one, had he opened it for discussion. I assume he was a very smart man who decided that this is not the way, that democracy very seldom works. And if you apply it, you probably won't solve the problem. I assume he was very smart. He decided this is not the way how to do it. He went down and presented it as laws which came from other source, from above. He did not play the democratic game, and anchored these 10 commandments in an authority outside of himself, the burning bush. You know, 10 commandments which were thus given to his people have a source which is identical in all cultures. These rules, 10 rules, appear sometimes in form of 12, 14, or 8, but the essence of them is human findings of necessary conditions under which human race can survive. I think this is a cultural fact about the origin of these 10 rules. Moses himself must have had it from Egyptian sources, where have very similar formulations in their own language and their own tradition. In addition, you know, there are very interesting facts about Exodus. You do not find any historical statement in Egyptian sources that there ever was Exodus. In Egyptian historical sources, there is no mentioning by historians that there is Exodus which would have impoverished Egypt. Can you imagine if you have let's assume United States at the beginning of 19th century. Our blacks had a Moses. So our blacks had a Moses who would have led them out of America, United States. And had they had a document about it and created a very important reference to it. And then later on, our historians find out that it never happened that nothing like this ever happened. Egyptian economy in the northern part of Egypt would have been probably ruined or partially ruined after exodus of all of these slaves. So it is very significant. And Egyptians were very meticulous, in terms of writing down every detail about their society. So there is nothing, absolutely nothing you can find. So historians agree that it is a conjecture, and the content of Ten Commandments is very similar to Hittite culture and to Babylonian culture, which had very similar statements. So what must have emerged out of these Hittite and Babylonian cultures? Israelites formulated necessary conditions for human society in order to survive, sanctioned from outside. This became the backbone not only of Jewish religion, but of Christianity and Muslims as well. So it is a reference which is almost identical, but no historical occurrence. It is a good story. It is a very important story for Western history of ethics and closely connected with religion. Still very powerful. But here is where it stands. Our critical scholarship, historical scholarship, cannot show that it ever was the case. So my eureka about Moses could be very probable. What happened with that later on is to be understood as a purpose of organized religion, which needs some common ground, which is offered to be believed in. Basic tenets of faith. It moved our Western society during the last 3,000 years. It became the most powerful force. And still, in great extent, it is still moving masses of people in these three traditions, Jewish, Christian, and Mohammedans. They don't like each other very much, but they are coming from the same tradition. This is also the part of Western man which, when you scrape him, the surface, you find the religious tradition coming from Jewish sources, later in Christian sources, and with extension in Mohammedan sources. So far, Moses, Eureka. About half a century later, there is another amazing development within Greek culture. Greeks had their own religion, polytheistic religion, believing in many gods. Around 5th century BC, there was a man I mentioned before, Xenophanes, who, this is about 300 years after Trojan Wars, an amazing group of Greek thinkers emerged around 6th century BC, which we call by the name pre-Socratics. And one of them, at the very beginning, Xenophanes, produced, and we could call it EUREKAs, two EUREKAs, which were the basic criticism of religion of Greeks, polytheistic religion. It became clear to him that Greek gods resemble human beings. The only difference is that they were immortal, but they had the same qualities. They cheated, they lied, and they betrayed each other, took over his wife, other god's wife. They got drunk. One of the stories when Pythagoras, founder of mathematics, formulated his Pythagorean theorem, it was impossible to believe that something like this can be done by human being, that you can have a findings which is forever the same. Square which is erected on the largest side of the triangle so A, let's call it A, B, C. If you erect a square on the largest hypotenuse of the triangle, it is always equal to two squares established on two remaining sides, B and A and B. So you can write, C. So A square equals B square plus C square. And this is forever, as he announced it. People around him were worried. How can a human being reach eternal truth? This was eternal truth. How could he get it? It is impossible. Mortal human beings can have mortal truth, not something like this. So there is a story, beautiful story. Pythagoras went to a party of gods and tried to ask some questions. But when he came in, they were drunk. And he saw that there was a package called Pythagorean theorem. It was he gave the name Pythagorean to it, but there was a package he took, and this was the truth. So he stole it from gods and announced it to his society. After gods got sober again, they found out that the theorem was missing. They got mad. And Pythagoras became scared. And he knew that gods can be bribed. So he discovered he will take 60 oxen and give them to gods on the altar. So all these 60 oxen were on the altar of gods, and gods, now sobered out, look at it and said, "What a generous man this Pythagoras is. Look at him. Let's pardon him." Since that time, it has been said that all oxen are shaking, afraid that new truth will be discovered. So this was Greek concept of gods, you know? And Xenophanes formulated it philosophically. These two principles are called anthropomorphism, man-made. Man-made. The other one is hypostatization, which means I take something from my mind, throw it out, find it there, and say, of course, this is a book. This is a doctrine of the human mind. We make things, throw them out, find them out. They are there. I believe that, and forget that we have made them. So combining this theory of hypostatization and anthropomorphism explains the whole tradition of Greek gods, polytheistic gods. At the very beginning of organized thinking, rational thinking, Greeks produced this kind of man who introduced order into what people were finding out and claiming what was the case. He summarily declared that everything what is stated by man is stated by man and invented by man. And when man claims that gods are so and so, it is man who is saying that gods are so and so. He said, if horses would have their gods, it would have been a big horse. Cows, a big cow. It would be cow-morphism, horse-morphism. Morphine is to make, to create. You see, it is quite a different foundation of human thinking than that of this religious tradition, where everything is anchored in God, one God. This is a great advance over polytheism. But as you see, what Xenophanes criticized in polytheism is applicable to monotheism as well. After that, 5th century BC, in Greece, there were other thinkers who were emerging with new questions. And these are the questions in front of us up to now. This is the basis of our Western tradition. What is the world we live in? Where from of this world? Where to? What am I in this world? Why I am here? Out of this came the search of man. In 20th century German philosopher Heidegger said, why is there something rather than nothing? This summarizes, the whole tradition. Greeks gave us the tradition of search, how to discover what the world is we live in, where the world goes, where from, where to, what is our role in this world, what is human being. And these questions are in front of us as they were in front of Greeks in 5th century BC. What Greeks did is also something, from today's point of view, quite logical. They decided where the world is coming from water. Their first philosopher said, from one element, from water, and everything is returning back to water. So they decided to select one element. Another said, no, I disagree with you. With your water, you can keep your water for yourself. It was air. It was the air. Out of everything came into being. Now third one comes, now keep your water and your air. It is fire. Fire, fire. And fire is the basic element. Then next generation comes and say, you dummies. There are 4 elements: water, air, fire, and something which cannot be defined. So you have monistic answers, one answers, dualistic answers, pluralistic answers. Now to explain how these elements work together, this was another great goal, And according to Xenophanes, no appeal to gods, Let gods have their eternal party and live happily, We don't come for advice, So they try to figure out. So pre-Socratics laid down the search. They exhausted this search. After they exhausted everything, a group of so-called atomists emerged on the scene and said, forget your water and air and foundation of everything are atoms. Atom means A is the negation which we use in English, atom. Atom in Greek means non-dividable. There is an element which is, you can cut everything, piece of bread, everything into small pieces until you cannot even hold it and cut it. That's atom. Uncuttable, uncuttable. This was also 5th century BC. Who puts these atoms together? So no, they are just flying, hitting, bouncing each other, and so those theologically inclined call them atheists. These atomists, Democritus and Leucippus. All through the 3,000 years up to 20th century, they were unbelievable to accept until the beginning of 20th century. New school of atomism had arisen, fighting among themselves because they were great physicists of 20th century like Ernst Mach, who still in 1915 did not believe in atoms. It was difficult to accept something what is not sensorially given. Of course, atom is a concept. And now this very concept of the mind helps to decipher the puzzle of the nature. And you discover something what could be called atom. And as you know, this atom non-cuttable was cut. We have cut uncuttables. Now think about it. And this cutting of uncuttables makes tremendous explosion. Kills thousands of people. Cutting uncuttables. You say, no, it's coming from mental asylum, no? Cutting uncuttables. This is what we have accomplished. And we know it works. And we probably will go into another war with Iran, if we don't get sober. Using cutting uncuttables. So this is the story of great eurekas of ancient Greeks. They laid down the foundation of search. They gave many answers. Of course, many answers because there were many searchers. Now, how to get oriented among all of these theories? At the beginning of our era, in 1st century AD, most of them were suppressed. They were replaced by new vision of God. We have the age of darkness. For 13th, 14th centuries, it was impossible to talk about discovery of Greeks. It is strange development when one of the centers of Christianity, Constantinople, was occupied by Turks. Those who were on the top in terms of intelligence and learning escaped from Constantinople, and they went in two directions. The theologians went to Moscow, thus establishing the third Rome, Constantinople, Moscow. Scientists and philosophers and artists went to Florence via Venice. They brought into Florence pre-Socratics, Greek arts, Greek language, And this is the beginning of what we call Renaissance. You see this strange connection? Turks occupy Constantinople. What a victory for Mohammedans. Destroy the second Rome. Those who escape to the West bring into the center of Western Christianity Greek heritage. They establish Plato's Academy in Florence. This is that Florence which had a great tradition of Dante, Petrarca, and other great artists. Here is a new foundation. Man was rediscovered as a purpose of the search and created new possibility for human growth. It was not an easy fight because the position of power was in the hands of the church. And as long as church was able to control it, they tried to suppress all these new Renaissance movements. Another great theory which was emerging very slowly and for which people had to die was description of the world around us. According to the Bible, we are the center of the universe, created by God. Corresponding astronomy was Earth-centered astronomy. We are the belly button of the universe. Everything turns around us. So it is in Bible too, you know. Who would dare to challenge it when all the power is in the hands of the church, which controls all aspects of our society? Those who decided to make a stand against it paid dearly for it. The astronomical theory is called Ptolemaic theory, Earth-centered universe. There was a theologian who resided in Poland, Copernicus. A man sitting on two chairs. A secret chair was this pre-Socratic chair, you know, which he was hiding. The official chair, he was a highly ranking bishop. He formulated sun-centered theory of our solar system. To be sure, he was waiting with it because he knew that it is not very nice to be exposed to fire. He was waiting until last few days before he died. He gave it to the public and he found people who took it and presented it to the general public. Those who defended it, notably Giordano Bruno, was burned at the stake in the year 1600. Great scientist Galileo Galilei, when it came so far, he denied his belief in sun-centered universe. In front of the examiners, cardinals, he decided just to call the whole theory nonsense. And after he did it, he was also afraid of fire. Humanly understood, you know. As soon as he denounced it, he turned around and said, "E si muove, a přece se to točí, my se točíme okolo toho." Ale he told it to friends. We still move around the sun. For that, they kept him in captivity almost until his last days. You see, it was not easy to be brave. Many others who dared to defend this heliocentric system of Copernicus, many of them had to die. Nowadays, you know, people don't die, but there are still a great many people who believe that we are the belly button of the universe, which was created 4,000 years ago. The progress moves slowly, but surely. It takes time. And so Greeks gave us completely new outlook on the world, and their tradition, expressed through Renaissance, established post-Renaissance science, post-Renaissance art, post-Renaissance literature, and thus creating a new post-Renaissance man. So we know where we are coming from. So we have the Jewish source, we have Greek source. The third source is the civilizational source, where we are coming from Romans. From Romans we learned everything technical, civil, living with the civilian living together, the problems of when people live together. How to make it possible for many people to live together. They need water. We have to supply them with water. What goes in goes out. You have to build a system of canalization. This is a great invention of Romans. During the Middle Ages, 10,000s of people were dying all over the Western world because they did not have canalization. That what Romans had 1,000 years before that time. Plague in London, you know, during Middle Ages, all over Western Europe. So this is what Roman civilization is all about, you know, building roads, supplying water, canalization, highways. They built prototype of new highway system from Rome via Appia, from Rome to the south via Appia. That road which was used by Romans to destroy Hannibal and Carthage. Another highway via Brindisi to Brindisi. That highway was used to destroy Greece. So you see how military works hand in hand with this Roman engineering. It is what Eisenhower exposed, you know, as a great complex where military closely connected with everything else. It was Eisenhower who saw this in Germany when he was and studied Hitler's Autobahn system. And the purpose, it was like Via Appia, Via Brindisi. Hitler built Autobahn system to occupy the Europe in all directions. This is what General Eisenhower brought after the war, and thanks to him we have the modern highway system all over the United States. So Romans gave us the third basic element, civilization, hand in hand with that, law. Roman concept of law, which is different from Anglo-Saxon concept of law, which is based on precedents. Roman system of law is definitional. You defined elements, man, a thing. Thing is stolen. What is stealing? You have a definition that only people can steal. You define man. And if you bring your dog to a judge, say, you know, my Wally, you know, stole me, you know, a ring. The Roman lawyer looks up definition and discovers that dog is defined as an animal, and dog is not defined as being able to steal. He throws out the case, say goodbye, forget it. You know, the case is settled definitionally. In our system, the doggy would take an attorney, you know, and it would be a long process, and then the attorney could go up to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court could decide that dogs are people. You see, completely different concept of law, which Romans conceived. So Romans are the third part of our nature. When we scrape, we have this Jewish one, you know, and we have this Greek one, you know, and Roman one. We try to live with all three, you know. You can ask yourself, which of these three had the greatest influence on our American culture? Certainly the first one, and the third one. You see, engineering project we have, you know, how engineering is very powerful. This is what we have learned, you know, from Romans. Not so much from Greeks. You know, when we ask ourselves what Greeks gave to the world, this is pre-Socratics and two great philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, which laid down the foundation for the Western way of thinking. Next to it, nation of learning, education, academy, which is model of all educational systems. Concept of art, arts, literature. This is also from Greeks. A depth of it and search, you know, for humanity, human expression. They gave us concept of democracy, but they never were democrats. It never existed during Greek history, only name. They were plutocrats. They were changing their governments, but money was ruling the society. Is it possible that we have taken over this, this concept of plutocracy? That we regard money and striving for money as the greatest virtue. And there are other things, you know. No other culture has glorified weapons. No culture in the history. We have glorified weapons. We have a principle that every citizen can have a weapon. We have a National Rifle Association which is unique. Nobody in the history has something like this. So, should we be proud of that? It comes from the Second Amendment. And we can be proud of it that we have it. Nobody ever glorified this in process of argumentation. Weapons should never be used. It is very difficult to touch it, just to talk about it. Romans glorified weapons, but they were controlled. They were never glorified the way as we do. Ancient Rome lasted roughly 400 years. When they were falling apart, they didn't know about it. They were still glorifying their games, believing in carpe diem, catch this very day, you know. Don't save, just borrow money, borrow more, you know. And catch this very day, enjoy the life now. Who cares for tomorrow? We have about 300 years. We still have 100 years. You know?
Maybe.
The time moves fast, and the problem, you know, of balance of budget in Rome was very similar to ours. Wars and wars. Nobody paid for it. They destroyed their own agriculture because they needed soldiers. You can take soldiers only from agriculture. If you kill agriculture, you have to take grain and food somewhere else in colonies. Colonists will rebel. In order to suppress the colonies, you need more soldiers. You see? You can never get out of this vicious circle. So these are lessons of the history. These are lessons of our EUREKAs. And let's hope we will have, somebody will have few new creative EUREKAs who will solve our today's problems.